Yeah, okay. Come on around, ma'am.
I have two myself.
So, at some point, I'll change seats with you, All right. Y'all let us know.
Do we need to be mic'd up? I see you got mics on the table.
Is that good?
If whoever's going to speak, I mean, you two I think primary are out.
Right,
but
when
if-
she speaks, she'll
then
move, I'll
sit in
change
your
seats.
seat.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Is that all right?
That's perfect.
All right, y'all just let me know.
All right, let me just see this here.
First, we all offer condolences to the family of Officer Amy Caprio, as well as law enforcement generally. We understand the nerve that this case has struck, the optics of an inner city kid being linked to the death of a Baltimore County police officer who is both female and white. We understand the inclination of some to rush to judgment, in part to satisfy their emotional thirst born out of anger. However, those of us who practice on a regular basis in the criminal courts of Maryland are quite familiar with the change in the composition of a case from its inception to its conclusion. In that regard, we're asking that people suspend their judgments, wait to see what the evidence is in this case. Finally, when those viewed as reprehensible can receive the full panoply of rights as all others, then the integrity of the criminal justice system is enhanced that much more. With regard to suspending judgment, waiting for the evidence, we're calling for the state's attorney, the police department, to release the body cam footage. It should speak for itself. And we see no good reason that the public, especially considering the emotional aspect of this case, should be kept in the dark. Release the video, the body cam footage, which the whole idea behind it was to give us an accurate understanding of what went on at a particular crime scene. And so, in that regard, we're asking the state's attorney's office to release it to the public, to the media, so that we can all see, because I think it will put a lot of misconceptions to rest. And in that regard, I would just ask, turn it over to Counsel here.
I think the body cam footage is the sine qua non of this case. There's been a lot of strong feelings about this case. But strong feelings do not equal strong facts. And we want to ask the tough questions about this case, because it generates a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. We want to know, why was there such aggression displayed by this officer in a situation that amounted to a traffic stop? We want to know why she alighted from her vehicle with her weapon drawn. We want to know why there were no lights or no sirens to stop this vehicle, why she blocked this vehicle in, which constituted a detention. We want to know what information she had in her mind, because all this information about a vehicle being stolen, about burglaries, all those occurred after the fact. She was called to the scene to investigate a suspicious vehicle and suspicious persons in this neighborhood. But what's suspicious about a Jeep Wrangler in that neighborhood? Is it suspicious because it's black? What's suspicious about gentlemen being in that neighborhood, walking around the neighborhood? People come in my neighborhood all the time. They're Jehovah's Witnesses. They're trying to get me to buy an alarm system. They're trying to do roofing repairs or window repairs to my home. So why was it suspicious for someone to call? And there was an incident, or there was occasion in this case where the officer was following my client. There's no indication that he had an equipment violation. There's no indication that he blew a stop sign or committed any traffic infraction. So what was it that prompted her to follow this vehicle for a distance and then block it in, come out with your gun blazing, and then start firing bullets? We need to know the answers to those questions, and we feel strongly that the body cam will provide us with these answers. And then you have the young man who is confronted by this. And I shouldn't even say young man, the
Yeah.
child. He's 16 years old. He's confronted by an officer. And according to witnesses that have been reported in the paper, there was a quick succession of get out of the car, get out of the car, get out of the car, and then pow. Three get out of the cars, and then a shot fired. And the shot whizzed over this young man's head, and he ducked down. And at that point in time, the car started moving forward. He didn't know what was going on. One side of the area was blocked, and the other side of the area, maybe he could make way. And why was the officer standing directly in front of this vehicle? These are just questions that we feel that can be answered if the body cam is turned over. If someone's got bullets whizzing by your head, you're in survival mode. You're trying to survive. This was not an intentional killing. It was not deliberate. It was not premeditated. This was an accident. And that's how we feel about it. Should there be some responsibility? I'm sure somewhere down the line, there will be some responsibility because this is a tragic situation. But just like the officer, this 16-year-old had to make a split-second decision. Am I going to stay here and have bullets riddle my body? Am I going to duck and preserve my life? He ducked and he closed his eyes and the car started moving forward. And the only reason why you duck is because bullets are coming towards you. What other reason is it? And what was the motivation to hit an officer? What is the motivation to just say, okay, officer's on the scene, I'm just going to run this officer over? There's no motive. So I'll submit to you all that there are a lot of questions that we have that we would like to have answers to. Strong feelings about a case does not make strong facts. Our job is to get to the bottom of it, to get to the facts. Forget about the optics. Forget about all the elements that makes this case dramatic and one that people cry out for. We want to know what was in the officer's mind at the moment she deployed deadly force. What probable cause did she have to believe that this person was going to do harm to her or some other individual in this residential district? What reasonable articulable facts did she have to believe that this individual inside of this vehicle was armed and dangerous? When you see this young man, he is a puny 5'1", 120-pound young man. You automatically know you're dealing with a child and not an adult. Where was backup? Since you blocked the car in, which is a detention, and if you had reasonable articulable facts to do that, when you pull out your weapon, that elevates the detention to an arrest. What was the probable cause for it? The other three individuals, they were nowhere near this scene. And I'll submit that she didn't even know or have any vision of them in her purview. She was there to investigate a suspicious car and what they believed to be suspicious people. And quite frankly, other than it being in Perry Hall, I do not know what young people in a residential area district, what about young people in a residential district makes them suspicious? I just don't know. So much so that the aggression upon initial encounter is your weapon drawn and ultimately bullets ringing out.
Let me say this also. This is, people are making a lot of assumptions. They're assuming that this young man stole the car, and they're assuming he drove it from Baltimore. No evidence of either of those. They're assuming that he knew about the three that got out of the car were going to burglarize a home. They assume that he knew that, and there's no evidence of that. The detectives, as expert as they are, especially in Baltimore County, questioned him for 2 hours over a 5-hour period. And he told them he did not know. And people might say, well, what do you expect him to say? The evidence also will show that he gave them the names and addresses of the 3 other individuals. So if he's going to be truthful and honest about that, why can't we trust the other things that he's had to say? So, but aside from that, what evidence is it that he knew a burglary was going on?
Right.
What evidence is it that he intended to hit and kill this police officer? The state has even conceded that when the gun was drawn at some point, either before or after the first shot is fired, he's ducking down. He's looking at the seat of the vehicle, and he's just instinctively trying to get away. As
Trying
Jay
to survive.
Wendell said, he was in survival mode. And because we understand the heightened sense around this case, the frayed nerves, the ugly emotions that are flowing, we understand that people are not going to be receptive to facts. But the facts are what controls this case now and tomorrow when it finally comes to trial. But if the state will release the body cam footage, then it will give us all a better idea. And it'll quiet down all the ravings and the rantings that are born out of some ugly emotions. And to that extent, I would just personally say to those that have called with vile messages and death threats to my office, it's not going to deter me, for one. I'm going to keep pushing for this lady's 16-year-old boy. He had just turned 16 in January. He's essentially a 15-year-old kid. And so death threats, vile comments, and the like, it's not going to deter. But we're hoping that, I began by saying let's withhold judgment until more information is out there. And we do believe that body cam footage will lend a lot to the general public's accurate understanding of what actually occurred that day.
And let me just say this. This was an extremely tragic accident. And it's not lost on any of us up here that a police officer lost her life in the line of duty. It's not lost on any of us. And we just want answers. We don't want to play the old shell game. We don't want to play hide the ball. You told everybody, Mr. Schellenberger, what you believe the evidence will show. So what is it going to harm if you produce the video that you say backs up your evidence? Produce the body-worn camera so we don't have to speculate as to what we believe the evidence is going to show. We want to know why Officer Caprio found it necessary to draw her weapon on the 16-year-old child based upon what ostensibly amounted to a traffic stop. We want to know why she fired a shot into the front windshield of that vehicle. It goes through the windshield and exits out the back window, shattering it. We want to know why this was necessary. And we want to know what information she had to display all of this aggression based upon that scenario, because we know the burglary information came after the fact. We know the stolen vehicle information came after the fact. We know the not having a driver's license information came after the fact. Everything came after the fact. Their own eyewitnesses, civilian witnesses, said they heard 3 get out of the cars and then pop. And then they said the next thing they saw was an officer on the ground, apparently injured, critically injured. Again, our hearts go out to that officer. But equally,
okay.
Our hearts go out to this mother and this family.
And I to that extent, unless you have some questions, I'm gonna move Ms. Wilson over here and she can field some questions so that you all can better hear.
Could you both please say your names first?
Warren A. Brown.
My name? J. Wendell Gordon, Gordon. Wendell is W-Y-N-D-A-L.
So we'll field any questions you all might have.
Ma'am, do you feel like the Department of Juvenile Services failed your son leading up to this incident?
Yes, I do.
How so?
Because numerous of times I asked them to detain him, to keep him, so nothing like this would happen, to get worse with everything.
So you were in court on the 10th and then the 18th?
Yes.
For him, did you ask for him, who asked for him to be sent back home, and why did you say you wanted him to be detained?
His public defender asked for him to be released because of the good behavior that he did when he was detained at the DJS system. The other question is, I asked for him to be detained because it was a cycle.
It was a cycle. What did the state's attorney at that time, the Baltimore City State's attorney, request of the court?
The state's attorney requested that he also be detained because of the arrest that he was. The judge granted that he be sent home on community detention. So now we here. Like, this is my son. Nobody understands what I've been through. This is my son. Everybody got so much to say. It's just terrible. This situation is just sad all the way around. Like, a person has lost their life. Like, my son will probably never get the chance to prove that he is not this person that is being painted. This is really hard. I did not want to come in front of y'all and break down and cry, but this is hard. I see my son mugshot on everywhere. This is not. My condolences to the family of the officer. My condolences from the bottom of my heart. This is so wrong. If they would have kept him, we wouldn't be here.
And let me say this too, because it has been, he's been demonized, and we understand that. But let me put things in absolute proper perspective. The only child, growing up in the household for 14 years, no problems. There's a newborn baby that comes along, and at the same time that the mother's devoting taking some attention away from Dante to the newborn, Dante is starting high school. You know how it goes from middle school to high school. Things change, so he starts to kind of hang with people. But he's 16 years old, and it's only been the last 4 or 5 months of his life that he had encountered contacts with the juvenile system. And what were they for? They weren't for drugs. They weren't for violence. They weren't for guns. They weren't for any type of assault. They were for being in a car that was stolen. Now, it's not to say that he should be patted on the back for that, but I think that we need to put things in the correct perspective. He ain't a killer. He doesn't have that spirit about him. That's not who he is. He's a kid that panicked, when a gun was put in his face. Some people become incontinent when a gun is pointed at them. Some are paralyzed with fear. Some turn and run. And so for us to be too critical of the way this 16-year-old act when confronted with this gun while waiting on some other guys who he didn't know what they were doing is the reality. And I don't care how people want to frame it, that's the reality.
Right. And I'll also say those other guys, as far as he knew, were there visiting other girls. They were teenage guys. He had no idea. They could have been visiting friends. He had no idea. They kept him in the dark deliberately about what was to take place. So I echo the sentiment of Mr. Brown with regard to this. I will tell you this. Despite having a 4-year-old child today, and Dante, who was 16, mother worked feverishly to ensure that her child could receive the services available to him, to make sure that his welfare remained intact. She worked feverishly. She just didn't, when he was missing, she just didn't call somebody. She was calling constantly. She was giving information. She was going over to people's homes, almost getting into fights with other children's mothers looking for her son. So this was a woman who was crying out for help. She turned to every resource available, including the court system. Because with the mother's wit and intuition, she had that feeling that sinks in your gut that something was about to happen. And it's just that mother's intuition. And she did everything she could to avoid what brings us here today. This is a good mother. And she did her very best. And she struggles with it. Because as a parent, you never feel like you've done enough. And when things like this happen, those feelings become even more intense and they don't subside. It's caused a great mental anguish and distress. And this is not an excuse for the conduct of her son, but it's an explanation as to how everyone has been affected by what has taken place. And again, not to forget about the victim in this case, because the victim had family too. And as we venture towards Memorial Day and the 4th of July and the holidays that come afterwards, there will be empty seats in 2 households. One shouldn't be empty, perhaps even 2, but definitely one should not be empty. And so I just can't overstate the tragic nature of this situation and how many families have been forever changed. And again, we're not excusing what took place, but we're explaining the fact that we understand how everyone has been affected. Notwithstanding all of that, Dante Harris is entitled to a fair trial. He's entitled to due process. He's entitled to a zealous defense. And we intend to give him that. And we will not be deterred, dismayed, or in any way turned around about those who feel like no one should stand up for this young man. You know, people ask me sometimes, how can you defend people against such serious allegations? Even those such as this, when it even comes to cases of murder. And I always respond the same way. My cases are always much bigger than the person sitting to the right of me at a trial table. We defend the Constitution. And quite frankly, our job is one of the noblest in the profession because we keep the system honest. Dante Harris will not be disposable. He's going to be fought for vigorously. This is not a murder 1 case. This is not a murder 2 case. We'll fight to determine what it actually is. But we know what it is.
Mr. Gordon, I had a question for you. To release the body camera video for a trial, wouldn't that potentially prejudice future jurors that have seen
You don't-
something on TV?
You don't think future jurors have been prejudiced already? With all the information that's come out from the police department? With the death threats that Mr. Warren Brown is receiving? The prejudice came out in the very beginning. I think that if anything, the way they're holding it so tight, so close to the chest, it might be helpful to us. Because then we'll see what's really going on. They've already described the horrific incident. We've seen videotapes in the Curtis Deal case. We've seen them in the Eric Garner case. We see videotapes. America is accustomed to seeing videotapes. So now you have a conscience? Why? In a case such as this? Baltimore County jurors are smart. We learned that. We learned that in the Corinne Gaines case. There was a lot of video going on. A lot of video that had been shown to the public. But the folks in Baltimore County can disabuse themselves of what they knew or what they thought they've known and judge a case based upon the law and the evidence. And I'm very confident that when they are able to see this case and receive the presentation of evidence that the state intends to present in our defense, I think that it will not be a first-degree murder case. I do not believe it'll be a second-degree murder case. I don't believe this will be a murder case at all. And so we look forward to our day in court. Because in the media, they can just throw out anything without the filters of the judicial process to ensure that only sufficient evidence is allowed to be considered. That only evidence that is worthy of a jury's weight is allowed to be considered, not opinions from lay people, not hunches and innuendo in the spewing of vitriol. We dwell in the courtroom. That's where we show our eloquence. That's where we'll show our defense.
Could one of you gentlemen address the discrepancies in what you've maybe heard from your client about having a gun pointed at him and trying to escape versus what the statement of probable cause says he told investigators in terms of he drove at the officer?
Well, you know what, that's interesting because, yeah, again, in my opening, I indicated that cases change complexion from the beginning to the end. For example, you'll read a statement of charges that says, written up by the officers, that says that the victim identified the defendant. And then, so that's what you have. And they say, oh, identified the defendant. And then through the discovery process, we find out that that the victim says, well, it looks a lot like the defendant. But it was characterized as an identification at the time. He drove away from danger, and that might have been in her, well, obviously it was in her direction. They make it sound like he drove at her. But by the same token, you can't have it both ways because they also admit that he told them his head was buried down in the seat. So he didn't see where he was going. And we're talking about a 16-year-old who has no propensities for violence shown in his background. Why, as Jay Wendell asked, is he going to take on a police officer who has this weapon pointed at him? Why? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It makes sense that he would get away from him. It makes sense that he would duck down. And you know, what we think evidence will show is that if you had not ducked down, the trajectory of that bullet from the front windshield through the back windshield would have ripped through his head. And then everybody be talking about a police-involved shooting. And it would be a police-involved shooting or police-involved killing, but it wouldn't be police-involved murder. But every time we refer to this young man in this case, you know, they say he murdered this police officer. And so, there's a long answer to your question, but essentially that is their characterization, but they can't have it both ways because they admit that his face was buried in the seat as he's pulling off.
I'd like to respond as well. You know, the officer that wrote this report was not Amy Caprio. He wasn't there. And so he likes to use, first of all, it's not even a time on this report. There are a lot of pieces of information that are actually missing. Now, I don't expect the entire case to be in a 3-page report, but I do expect to see some substantive information that is in it. And so Nothing in this report is a quote. And a lot of times when officers write their report, they will quote what a defendant or an arrestee says. I don't see a single quotation in this report. All I see is a characterization of what they believe that happened. Again, we need to know what information did Amy Caprio have in her head at the time she alighted from that vehicle with her gun drawn. That's critical. We need to know what information that she used to consider whether or not to fire this weapon at a child in the driver's seat. We want to know that information, and that's not an unfair question to ask. Because if this incident amounted to a bad stop or an unlawful arrest or detention, maybe the evidence that flowed from that bad stop or unlawful arrest or detention is suppressible. And then what do you have left of the case? If everything that occurred after the stop is suppressible, God forbid there's no attenuated circumstances, then what do you have?
But I'm glad you asked that question because, that's out in the public domain also that he drove towards her. And that is fueling some of the, emotions and anger and hatred and vitriol as well. But, people going to hear what they want to hear, but it should be said and heard that his head was buried as he drove off. That, there wasn't any intention on his part to strike this officer. His intention was to get away. And not at all costs to her, but at all costs to himself.
Right, to get away from what he believed to be would have
Gun.
been a barrage of bullets to continue to whiz past his head, like that first one that whizzed past his head, that he was able to escape death from.
Ms. Wilson, in the week that he was quote unquote AWOL, court records show that you tried feverishly trying to get in touch with him. You blocked your phone, and you and the DJS representative were trying to get a hold of him. You guys had a court hearing on Friday, to which it was just simply continued until Tuesday, and then this incident happened on Monday. Can you explain to us what happened in that court hearing, and did you plea again to go find him, detain him? What was your...
At the court hearing on Friday, it was more so directed to his public defender. It was more so, where's your client? Do you know where your client is at? I couldn't answer it because I didn't know when I was asked. I thought they was going to do a warrant so he could be located and found and detained, but that didn't happen. Only thing happened was I was summoned, and I got a summons for me, and I got one for him for us to return on Tuesday. And that basically was it.
In your opinion, is that yet another failure of this system for you?
I did.
And also that GPS, it's crazy as we talked yesterday.
Right.
It just lets them know a beep that he's outside of the zone, right? But it doesn't say where he is. You take other programs like ASAP and Towson, the home detention program, their GPS will track, they know where a person's going to be. So what?
Explain to us that there's two versions, and that it's the judge's discretion to assign which GPS or non-GPS ankle bracelet, and apparently Mr. Harris had the non-GPS version. So you only knew when he was not home, or they only knew when
They only knew when he was not home or if he left out.
Right.
And
Ms. Wilson, one of the questions that has come up is, we heard in court on Tuesday that his first arrest, what seemed like his first arrest in the juvenile system was in December.
Yes,
Is that
his
correct?
first arrest was in December. That was the first time of him ever being arrested was in December.
What about before that point? How would you describe him before that point?
He was a regular 15-year-old, the normal 15-year-old. It was just unfortunate that things took the wrong turn once he first got arrested. Like, this was the first time of him being detained, me having to go and pick him up. December was the first time. I never had an issue with the police with him. He did teenager things, all teenagers do, but the arrest started in December, like you said.
And I also want, go ahead.
What changed? Why do you think these arrests started happening?
I think the environment, I think his peers, I think being a follower, bad decisions.
He was on the other side of town too.
Yeah, he was not home, for the record. He was not doing any of this thing, for the record, in West Baltimore. He was doing these things in East Baltimore. And if y'all look, y'all will see every arrest was located in East Baltimore, just for the record.
And why is that significant?
It is significant because it's a lot of backlash as far as me being his mother. Where was his mother? Why was his mother not able to do this and do that? Once again, I walk streets, neighborhoods, knocked on doors, looked for him, located him numerous times, you know, altercations, fussing with other parents, calling, texting. I did it all when it came to me trying to get my son to get it together.
And you even placed your job in jeopardy, didn't you?
I did. I don't have a job now because the court from December up until now is a lie. I tried my best to provide and take care of my children. I've raised him. He know right from wrong. Don't get me wrong. He know. Everything changed. His life, my life, the officer life in a split second. And it's just now I feel terrible.
Where was his father? Did you have any help?
No, the only help I had was from my family, my friends, my support system. I didn't have a lot of help from his father's side. No, none of that.
Where was his father?
His father was mainly not in his life.
Do you have any idea what would get them to that particular area of Perry Hall?
I don't know. Like, I can't even say. I don't even know the ones he was with. I don't know nothing about why, where. I have no clue. But Sunday, I had a feeling like I wanted to go and find my son. It's just this feeling I wanted to go and find him. I always have hope for my son. I don't want nobody to think that I did not care, I did not love, I did not want him to get something out. I don't want nobody to think that. This is the hardest thing that I have to do, to try and validate that I did what I was supposed to do or try to. It's hard. It's hard.
You have a 4-year-old daughter.
I do. And he loves her dearly. It's heartbreaking to have to say, where is she? Where is Dante? Mom, where is Dante? It's very, very heartbreaking, and I have to say he'll be home soon. I can't disclose this to her.
I'm sorry.
You know, like, it's hard. My family is going through things too. You know, it's hard. It's very hard all around.
What do you say to people who, even though you say your family is going through things, or your family is going through things, but to that family who's laying Amy Caprio to rest and all that, few things to go to?
I really am truly sorry for this. If I could have just found my son, he would still be here, and my son would be here with me. It's so hard. I'm truly sorry for the actions that my son did. I don't know what was in his mind at the time. I don't know. I was not there. I just wish I'd have found some time before this happened.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.